How's it going, everyone? I want to chime in and give my tuppence worth on this brand new lens that's come out recently from Canon. It's going to be due out in December. I'm not referring to the new 24 to 105 f2.8 hybrid lens. I am, of course, referring to the bigger zoom lens, the 200 to 800 f6.3 to f9, and it's an RF lens, meaning that it's for Canon's RF mirrorless mount. Okay, so this lens has been highly anticipated by many people, including myself. I read all the articles, I watched all the videos, not just the new ones of the hands-on reviews that people have done, but also the anticipation videos leading up to the release of this lens. It's due out in December in a couple of weeks, and I had it on order. I was excited about getting this lens, thinking of what I could do with this lens, and in the last few days I decided, you know what, I ain't gonna get this lens. And in this video I'm gonna explain to you exactly why, because I think it's a valid reason and it might be of interest to you if you're just like me, a little bit undecided, if you think it's going to be a good idea to get this lens or not. So let's get stuck into it and talk about this brand new big zoom lens from Canon. So right, I've kind of liked the look of this lens since the early days, since I saw the first plans, the early articles that came out. I was going, you know what, this could be a cool lens, a nice kind of versatile zoom lens that I bring with me that's not going to weigh too much, but that's going to be a little bit of a step up from my cheap ass f11 800mm Canon lens, Canon RF lens there behind me. So I was like, yeah, I'm hell-bent on getting this lens. And when I heard of the price, when the price came out recently, I was going, you know what, that's not bad. That's what I expected. But now that I kind of think of the price a little bit more and look at what the lens is doing, I'm kind of wondering, I'm slightly thinking that it's a little bit expensive for what it is. And let me explain that in this video. But first, I'm going to say what I like about this lens. Okay, it's a 200 to 800. That's a lovely range. Kind of like the 150 to 600 that we're all familiar with. You know, those third-party lenses like from Tamron and Sigma that everybody kind of starts out with. It's like one of them and some. It's like a third added on, of course. So 200 to 800, that's a lovely versatile range. Not just good for wildlife, but good for sort of creative photography as well. A very sort of fun range. You know, if you're in wide open spaces, maybe, you know, at the sea, in areas where you can kind of do creative shots. And I used to love doing that with my 150 to 600 when I had that lens. I would get all sorts of kind of cool, zoomed in, highly compressed shots. So this lens, I think, is going to be a nice, versatile, sort of funky lens for people who don't want to spend massive money and want a bit of flexibility. So it has that going for it. I love that about this lens. It's got better, stronger build quality than the cheaper f11 here behind me. So it's a little bit heavier, but it's not too heavy either. I do believe it's about 3 kilos. The Sigma here behind me with the little skin on it and the hood is probably around 3.5 to 4 kilos. So it's going to be lighter, easier to manage. And of course, being a zoom, it's versatile too. So it's a kind of an overall nice lens. It's white. I don't know why people are getting excited by the fact that it's white. I think people like the idea of having a white Canon lens. It looks like, oh, I've made it now, I'm a pro. But essentially, Canon have just made it white for the simple reason that, you know, it takes less heat. It doesn't get as warm from the sun. And considering that people will be outdoors with this a lot. So it just means that the components inside are likely to get less warm. That depends. If you put some camo on it, might heat it up a little bit. But as of now, that's why the lens is white. It's no big deal for me. If it came out black, I'd be just as happy. To be honest with you, black is kind of better for wildlife anyway. And if you do wrap your lens in a skin like this, black is always nicer. Anyway, that's not really a valid point. It has a zoom ring and it has the sort of, you know, the knurled RF ring there, the control ring as well, which acts as a focus ring as well. So it doesn't have a dedicated focus ring from what I can see. And the zoom ring, it's got a little stiffener, dampener in there as well. So I haven't got my hands on that yet, but I'm sure it's quite nice to use. The build quality seems to be adequate. As I said, a step up from this lens behind me. So yes, the lens has appealed to me in many, many ways. Whilst I thought the lens was quite affordable and not a bad price, I'm kind of saying to myself, you know, that's nice. That's a nice chunk of cash. Do I need this lens? Is it going to be worth it? If you are like me, buying gear, you know, if you're buying any camera equipment, if you're parting with your cash, you're going to be wanting to watch reviews and you're going to suck up every little bit of information on these lenses. And I've watched the new videos from a few different participants, those wildlife photographers lucky enough to get their hands on it. Now, for some reason, there was 2 South African users. One of them from a channel called Orms, a big dude out on the beach somewhere in South Africa, and he showed the lens off. And then there was another lady from Pangolin Wildlife, a red-haired, quite elegant lady, very good photographer. She does some fantastic wildlife guiding and stuff in South Africa. I'd love to go on one of those tours, by the way. Not just because of her. I'd like to go on a South African safari, who wouldn't? And in the first video I saw, the guy out on the beach, the Orms camera shop guy, he did some images of gulls and cormorants down by the water's edge, both video and stills. And the first thing I noticed was some of the bokeh, some of the background, the way it was blown out, just didn't look that nice, and looked pretty much exactly like how this lens would work, this f11 lens. There really wasn't that much difference. And when I was looking at it going, okay, right, that kind of looks like my f11 lens that's less than half the price of this lens. And I was saying to myself, okay, I was hoping it might look a little bit better. I know f9 is still a pretty small aperture, but I was hoping that it would have a little bit of a nicer sort of bokeh, blown out highlights, reflections off the water. I just thought they looked a little bit kind of digi-scope-ish, or as I said, a bit too like the f11 there. So in the Pangolin Wildlife video, I noticed that she was sort of justifying that small aperture as being not that big a problem. And I've seen other people say that as well. Oh, you know what, f9 is not that big a problem if you had the subject close to you, and if the background is out of the way, if you compose your shot in a certain way to isolate the subject, which is always the kind of a thing you want to get in wildlife, because so often when you're doing wildlife photography, you have kind of a messy background. You might have like scrub or bushes or something that mightn't actually look that nice in the image. So you do very often want to blow out the background. It's just a thing. And that's why lenses like this f4, you know, are such a nice option, and I'll talk about that lens in a little while. But firstly, back to the small aperture apologists, which I'm seeing a lot of lately, especially when it comes to this lens. When you're a wildlife photographer, and if you're a wildlife photographer who's sort of interested in wildlife that mightn't be so common, that might be a little bit harder to get to, stuff where you need to be opportunistic and you need to be watching out for what comes across the horizon, this is the way I work. I like rarer stuff. I like stuff that's harder to find. I'm not going to sit outside and just get, you know, a chaffinch or a stone chat on a little bramble. I want to get something that is of interest, a much rarer bird, a difficult bird to find. So the opportunity of composing is far less. So therefore, you're not going to be able to kind of compose images as carefully. And what will end up as a result then is you're going to have stuff that ends up against a background that isn't blurred that much. Do you get what I'm saying? So the f9 is going to be a little bit more of an issue, I think, than what a lot of people are saying. Now, she showed a sample of birds in the grass, and she showed one good example which looked pretty good, but you could see in a wider aperture lens, an f4 600 lens, which is a hugely expensive lens, but the one she got with the new 200 to 800 actually looked quite well also. But she then shared a second image of like a black-bellied grouse or some bird like that. I'm not overly familiar with South African birds, and I noticed that it was further away, and she just spoke about how a further away bird was just losing quality. The lens was losing sharpness. The lens was also losing contrast. And you might say, okay, right, it mightn't be any better than the f11 800, but it can zoom from 200 to 800. It's a lot more flexible. But you have to remember that if you're a wildlife photographer, particularly if you're shooting on full frame, this zoom lens is going to live in that longer end, in that 800 range. And even on crop sensor cameras, when I was using a 150 to 600, any wildlife I did on the crop sensor cameras, it was always just left at 600. Like almost nothing was shot in the wider end of the lens. So therefore, I feel that with this lens not performing its best at the 800, when it's fully rolled out to f9, I just think it should have a better image. I think the image isn't as good at that range, for that distance also, when things are a little bit further away. I think that's where the majority of the stuff you're going to photograph with this lens lies. And I'm just saying to myself, right, if I spend 2,700 euros getting this lens, and I go out with it and I'm shooting with it, and I'm saying to myself, you know what, I wish I brought my f4 with me, my 500mm Sigma f4, because at least I'm going to get crisp shots. Now this lens is adapted, it's an EF lens. It's nowhere near as good at focusing as an RF lens will be. But having said that, in darker conditions, it might actually rival the RF because it's letting in a lot more light into the sensor. So the focusing can be quite good on a brighter lens, even if it's not a native mount. In dark conditions, once that aperture is bigger. So I think that there's going to be times, if I had that lens, I bring it with me. Sure, I might have the 800, it's a lot better than 500 for reach, but I'm just going to be saying to myself, you know what, this isn't what I want. And a lot of the stuff, even the other night, I saw a bird, an owl. I was very lucky to find it. Owls are incredibly rare in Ireland, short-eared owls, this was. And whilst I didn't get good images, I took some video clips. It was very, very dark, but I shot at f4 and I was able to just capture something of that owl at f4. If I had that lens with me, if I had the f9 800, I don't think I would be sharing anything online. I don't think I would use the content at all because it was way too dark. And that's the difference, you see, between these smaller aperture lenses and a wider aperture, bigger aperture f4 type lens. You're sort of limited with light so much. So the other day I was shooting a wildlife job. Every now and again I do a little bit of wildlife work, and it's lovely. It's a bit different to doing corporate videos. I really enjoy it. And I was in a cement factory, which is a very, very big plant, very big operation, and they have a quarry. It's pretty vast, and they have a lot of birds in the area, and they asked me to sort of get nice images which they can use to build a biodiversity program and use for social media and all that. So it's not the sort of bird photography where you would be expecting really good results, because you just have to capture stuff. So therefore, you're just grabbing what you can. And I was very lucky to have a peregrine falcon fly over me. The falcon was maybe 40 or 50 meters above my head. Now it's November, Ireland is getting darker, but the sun was shining. It was a bright, bright day. And I was shooting at a sort of optimal shutter speed for birds in flight that are fairly close to you. I do think you shouldn't really go lower than 3.5 thousandths of a second. So I took a few snaps of the falcon with the f11. And I just looked back at the images and I said, you know what? These images are as good as you can get of birds in flight at that distance out of this lens. I just said to myself that I've never gotten sharper images. But having said that, I just looked at the images and said, you know what, they're so noisy. It's still, even though it's a sunny day, you know, if you have any type of fast shutter at all, it's really cranking up the ISO. Now, I took a few other images as well, and you know, I mightn't have had to use such a fast shutter, but there was still quite a bit of noise. And I noticed that with this lens, you know, this f11 lens, that even on the brightest of days, you're struggling with artifacts coming into the image because the lack of light that's just hitting the sensor. I shot a cuckoo last year. I thought I had some really amazing shots of the cuckoo. I had to do a bit of sniping to get close to it, relatively close. I wasn't that close, but I just noticed that there was a lot of color breakup in the image, a lot of magenta patching coming in, something that I'd associate with just a lack of light coming into the image. And I just said to myself, this is why you want a wider aperture lens. I got this lens 2.5 years ago. It was on offer for 4,350 euros, and I got the VAT off that meaning that lens just cost me $3,500. Now it's a 500, but it's an f4. And the first day I brought that lens out, I was in an area where I often go for wildlife to try and find rare raptors and stuff like that. So it's an area that I mightn't necessarily get brilliant photography, but at the same time, I might see something interesting. So you get hen harrier and you get different, rarer bird species, because Ireland is kind of not a really great country for bird photography. Stuff is very skittish. It's hard to get close to stuff. Plus birds like raptors are really rare here. So anyways, I was out there and I just took one image of horses. Now I was used to shooting these horses in the distance, just practicing, just waiting for a bird to come along. But the first image I just took with the f4 of the horses, it wasn't even that well focused or composed, but I just said, this is why people want to shoot at wider apertures. And I can honestly tell you that lens just lives at f4. Now you might think, okay, if a bird is in flight, I'm gonna stop down a little bit, and I'm gonna, try and get the whole bird in focus. But I have shot everything, all the birds in flight on this lens at f4. It has lived at f4, and even sometimes if I accidentally stop up to f5.6 or f6.3, I'll go, oh, shug, I'll just bring it back down to f4. So it's lived at that aperture. So this is the thing. If you buy this lens, if you get yourself this new 200 to 800 f6.3 to f9, you're going to end up taking images. You're going to end up being, you might be happy with some, and you'll start posting to social media. And what's going to happen is you're going to just be a little bit frustrated at how dark the lens is at f9, because a lot of wildlife is in darker conditions, and B, you're just going to be a little bit, unhappy with the depth of field and the quality of the image. I just honestly think that, and that's why I've decided, I'm going to park this one, because 2,700 euros, okay, it's relatively affordable, but unless I'm really using that lens, it's a waste of money, and I would be better off just saving that, selling these two lenses, combining it with that 2,700, and maybe putting it towards the ultimate dream lens for me, which is like the 600mm f4 RF Canon lens. Okay, not Mark 1, not Mark 2, just the RF. There's only one. Now I could get an older Canon EF Mark II at a cheaper price, but I just think if you're going for it and you want the ultimate pro results, you're going to want that. Now, why would I get rid of the Sigma? The Sigma is great, but the focusing just is not good enough for smaller birds. It's fine for bigger birds that are moving. They tend to be easier to get. You're talking about a hen harrier coming over the reed beds, something like that. Generally, something like that is a little bit easier to get. But if you're dealing with small birds like swallows, swifts, sand martins, I was recently asked to photograph sand martins and I just could not photograph them because the 800 was too close and it was too dark to register focus, and then the Sigma just couldn't do it because of the third party. The focus is just too slow. So I said to myself, if I have the 600 RF f4, I'm going to be able to get these shots. Plus you have the new Canon R5 Mark II coming out. So can you imagine how well set up you will be if you have the new Canon R5? God knows what that's going to have lined up for wildlife photography. The focus system in there, and as I said, if you have an RF wide aperture lens that lets in all that beautiful light that gives you that lovely shallow depth of field and focuses brilliantly. So that's my honest thoughts on it. Now you might be saying, Hugh, you're missing the point. You're talking about hugely expensive lenses, and this is a budget lens. It's not a professional lens, but at the same time I'm seeing a lot of people who are pros talking about this lens. There's a lot of YouTubers that have done anticipation videos about this lens, and a lot of them have bigger, wider, faster lenses. And even Chelsea Northrup, when she was reviewing this lens, she was saying how much more likely she was to take this than her big f4 because it's so much lighter, so much more convenient. And I bought into that, and I actually got myself this lens. But being perfectly honest, I actually have left this on the shelf a lot, gathering dust recently. So I had this up for sale, and it's actually at a good price, but I haven't had anyone interested in buying it. So that's kind of a bit of a concern there. Now with the aperture of that lens, it starts off at 6.3 at 200, and then it goes to f9 at 800, but it's like f8 at 500, I think. So you're just saying to yourself, Canon, why are you killing us with this aperture? And they say, oh, if we make a bigger aperture, it needs to be, you know, the lens is going to be twice as heavy and all this. And I'm going, okay, right, but you know, Nikon have a fairly light 800mm f6.3 lens. Now that lens is priced at $7,000. It's a lot of money. At €7,000, it's about $5,500. But it's a lot of money, but it's a serious pro lens. 6.3 at 800 is pretty amazing, and it's kind of lightweight. So I wish Canon would sort of, you know, bridge that gap between their high-end pro stuff, the stuff that costs over $12,000, and the cheap stuff. They seem to be kind of catering for either end. But if they came out with the 600 f6.3 or a 800 f6.3 like Nikon for the same price as the Nikon lens, I would be all over that like a rash. Now I think a really big positive with this lens, like what we've seen with the 100 to 500 f7.1 lens, is that it's going to be a fantastic lens for videography, for filming, and in particular filming handheld, which has been something that's been very, very difficult to do in the past with longer range zoom lenses. But we've seen that the 100 to 500 is just absolutely amazing for handheld video. And believe it or not, I couldn't get over how good the f11 at 800 was for handheld video. So light, so easy to hold up, and just actually shoot handheld clips. Now you can see that it tries to reset the stabilization every now and again. You will get these kind of shifts and sways. But having said that, it's still just really amazing what these lenses can do. So wildlife photography, you know, generally speaking, it's all about fast aperture, capturing the action and freezing the bird in flight perfectly. So you're always struggling to get the most out of the shutter in terms of speed. But that changes a little bit with videography, because videography, as always, it looks nicer with a little bit of motion blur, and that does apply too to wildlife. So when you're filming with a lens that has a smaller aperture, you're kind of going to get away with it a bit better than when you do photography, because generally you're going to be shooting with a slower aperture speed. So say, for example, you're shooting at 120 frames per second. You can easily shoot then at a shutter speed of, you know, 1/250th of a second, or even 1/400th of a second. So in lower light situations, ironically, which it's kind of normally the other way around, but in lower light situations, this lens, you know, will be better for video than photography. Now, I've tried hand holding the Sigma 500, which weighs quite a bit for videography, and it's days like that where I might want to take a few film clips that I wish I would have a better RF lens, because they're much better for stabilization. So even the f11 sometimes will get me nicer clips than the f4 Sigma here in terms of handheld video. So the bottom line on this lens, you know, there's different people going to go for it. There's the total novice that just needs a wildlife lens. They want to go straight to the RF and bypass the third-party cheaper lenses like the Sigma and Tamron 150 to 600s, and they want to go straight for the jugular Canon RF. I think, yeah, look, they're going to be happy with it. Then you have the sort of more experienced users, the people that might know what it's like to shoot with a wider aperture lens, and they might have it, just want it for fun. Like, being perfectly honest, if I had more spare cash, I would get it in a nanosecond just to try it out, because I do think it would be a lot of fun. But I just think that, you know, with cash, I need to just put every penny I have into the right gear for me. And for that reason, I just think that, look, I'm going to pass this time. So I hope this video is of interest to you, and I hope you got something out of it if you're kind of on the line with this lens. So I haven't been uploading much on YouTube recently for the simple reason that, you know, life is kind of difficult at times. I have a full-time vocation in shooting content for clients, and I make a hell of a lot more money shooting videos for people than YouTube will ever do for me. I've not got to the stage where I can get sponsorship and get companies giving me money to make videos. If I do, I can actually do more videos. So yeah, if companies want to advertise with me or whatever, yeah, I could maybe afford to do more YouTube stuff instead of work, but as of now, that's not happening. So I am just working, I'm minding my child, family life. I'm keeping busy. I'm trying to look after my health in the gym, training, and it's just so difficult to get YouTube videos out there, particularly when they're so edit heavy as mine are. And that's why this video is just easier to do. I'm just talking as opposed to putting in a load of B-roll, because that's what takes time. So I've got a few new bits of gear. I've got a new Osmo Pocket 3 that I want to review. I've been using that lately. I was using it today. I have new Freewell filters as well. The V2 filters from Freewell. I have a few little bits from a company called Moment as well, which I'm going to share in my videos. I'm using new sound gear. I've got my little zoom. You can barely see it there. That's my Zoom F3. Got some lights here from iFootage. There's plenty of stuff coming in. They're sending me new stuff as well. I've just way too much lights. So look, I'm going to try and get more content out soon. I know I keep saying it and I shouldn't say it unless I know I'm going to do it, but I just can't help it. I just really want to shoot more videos and do more wildlife stuff, do more creative stuff. So that's it from me. Thanks for watching. Very grateful to those of you who've subscribed as well. So until the next video, from myself, Hugh Sweeney, it's over and out. I'm going to make a nice cup of tea now, and I'll chat to you guys very, very soon.